Almost all technology on the planet today owes its origins to inventions with one purpose: war. Military innovation is consistently at the cutting edge of technological advances. And most of today's lethal weapons owe their origins to the inventors of the ancient world. This is the story of the ancient world's death machines. Death in the ancient world was an everyday reality.
The ancients had a very different idea of death from us. I mean, we like to think that we're going to grow old comfortably and kind of grow into our death, whereas for the ancients, death was almost certainly just around the corner.
In a world where death was an everyday reality, machines designed to kill became more and more sophisticated. Ovens roasted their victims alive.
There are many stories about tortures that used to circulate in the ancient world, and people would listen in horror, to these newly developed, fiendish, gruesome tortures.
Macabre decapitation machines ended life in an instant. Apocalyptic skyscrapers, among the largest mobile machines ever built in history, had the potential to extinguish hundreds of lives in minutes. And ancient death machines have left their legacy of horror in fields and valleys right up to the present day.
It would impale armour, it would impale flesh, it would impale horses.
Obsessed with inventing ways to inflict pain and harm, man has pushed his engineers harder in this field than in any other area.
Technological development in those days was very similar to what it is now. So anything that could be developed which had a military usage was obviously highly desirable.
Today, the Ancient Discoveries team is investigating history's death machines. In monasteries in the remotest regions of China, monks have spent thousands of years developing some of the most sophisticated death machines in history. But their journey begins with the simplest. It is something most people have, yet few know how to utilize its lethal potential: the human hand.
If you need to use self-defense, then it's about 98% chance you're going to be unarmed. So therefore it's more useful to use unarmed techniques. If you get taken by surprise, you've always got your hand.
Ian Armstrong has devoted a lifetime to the Shaolin martial arts. He is one of the few Westerners to have trained in China. But it wasn't until the application of metalworking engineering that the kung fu fighters and assassins of ancient China maximized their killing potential.
In China, you only have to go back to the 1950s for banditry still to have been rife, and most of those bandits would have been using the sort of weapons that we can see here. So if you were attacked by somebody with these things, you'd want to be armed with something, otherwise you're at a significant disadvantage. A heavy weapon like this would be very effective against an armoured opponent. Somebody who has a metal helmet on, this will probably shear through it, and if it doesn't shear through it, it might still smash a skull or break a neck.
As technology advanced, kung fu weapons became more complex. So complex that many believe they could not even have existed.
So what I've got here is my interpretation of a very strange and mysterious device from China. It's called the flying guillotine nowadays. The original Chinese name was blood dripper. It's intended to be a decapitation device. We only have a few very vague, oblique references to this device from Japanese sources. And this device apparently was used by an elite body of assassins. It looks a little bit like a flying saucer, and it consists of several parts. The top disc is actually loose and it supports the bottom by a sheet of fabric. And the idea was that this would be either thrown or placed over the head of the victim. The weight of this would then drop down, the fabric supports it, so that the bottom ring would be sort of more or less underneath the victim's chin around their neck. Now the assassin would probably be at some little distance, 5 or 10 yards away, but he would still be holding the cord. And when he gives a sharp tug, this would activate the blades. We can imagine that given the blade technology in China and Japan at this time, that these could have been very sophisticated and incredibly sharp. So in theory, this would actually sever the head from the body.
Kung Fu fighter Mike Paul has been training in the art of long-range attack weapons for 12 years. He is proficient at weapons like the whip chain and the meteor hammer, 8 feet of silk cord with a 2-pound iron ball on the end.
Well, the monks would basically live, breathe, eat Kung Fu, so they're probably practicing something like this, 5-6 hours a day. They could probably pick a small bird out of a tree.
In the right hands, this simple technology becomes a lethal killing device. But will the complicated workings of the flying guillotine be as deadly?
The idea behind this was to basically let the guillotine fly, hopefully landing on top of the head, and with a good sharp pull, then decapitating the victim. I definitely don't think you'll be creeping up on somebody and surprising them with this. I am pretty sure that if it was used, you'd have to stealthily sneak up, hide in a bush, climb a tree and try to drop it over the head rather than launch it at the head. Sneak out of the tree and drop the guillotine onto the head and then pulling and decapitating afterwards.
Mike's demonstration has shown that the weapon could have been used to assassinate. However, it has also shown that the device was impractical except in very specific situations. But Kung Fu master Ian Armstrong believes it was the mythical and mysterious, overcomplicated nature of the machine that gave it its real power.
The success of the flying guillotine comes from the fact that it's a mystery, nobody's ever seen one. In order to create terror, you need this idea of the unknown. Rumour goes around there are assassins with flying guillotines that are lopping off people's heads. We find a headless corpse, we deduce that somebody used a flying guillotine. Potentially, it creates a terror weapon.
In some ways, as a sort of weapon of terror, it would have immense psychological effects. Just the idea of these things being around would make people nervous.
The threat of pain and death can be as powerful a weapon as actually causing casualties.
The fact that people were talking about them was a significant point.
The ancients continuously spread fantastic rumors of pain and suffering.
There was one particular ruler who used to baste his enemies in butter and strap them into a boat and then send the boat out to sea so that flies would come and lay eggs on their bodies, and then these poor men would be eaten alive by the maggots of the flies.
The Greek king Phalaris ruled in the 6th century BC. He ordered the construction of a torture device designed not to be an efficient execution machine as much as a weapon of terror.
The bull was something which turned torture into an art form. And the idea was that a particular tyrant had commissioned an inventor to create a metal bull. And into this bull would be packed 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of this man's particular enemies, and the bull would be heated up from underneath. These men were, of course, trapped inside, so what you're creating is a hideous bull-shaped oven. And the stories go that the crowd would gather around and listen to the screams of the men inside as they were slowly cooked to death. What gives it a particularly horrible, sophisticated piquancy is that we're told that actually pipes were inserted into this bull so that the sound of these men dying sounded like a bull bellowing. So it was almost kind of turning torturous death into a horrible piece of performance, into a bit of theatre.
Like the flying guillotine, the bull relied on its reputation as much as its efficiency. The terror potential of machines like this relied on the mystery surrounding them and their uses. But there was another weapons system of the ancient world that was shrouded in mystery. The secrets of Greek fire have been lost in time. The Ancient Discoveries team is investigating this top-secret ancient weapon. a Greek fire flamethrower that has not been used in anger for over 500 years. But tonight, Richard Windley will unleash the full power of this lethal weapon. Machines of death are usually surrounded by myth and fable, spin and propaganda perpetrated by the inventor to terrify his enemy. Today, the military's most valuable weapons are highly classified. Yet 1,000 years ago, there was a military secret more explosive than any guarded by the Pentagon today. A weapon so secret, its inventors took its mysteries to the grave.
The Byzantines were very, very worried about it becoming generally known. They really did not want this stuff being used against them.
The weapon was controlled by the Byzantine emperors, rulers of the superpower of the Mediterranean throughout the first millennium. And they used a secret weapon whose technology is now lost.
It's one of the world's greatest mysteries. For 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire set fire to every warship that tried to take Constantinople.
Message fragments and ancient texts dating from the 7th century contain horror stories of a terrifying chemical compound known as Greek fire.
We still don't know what Greek fire is, but we do know that it scared the living daylights out of the Bulgarians, the Russians, the Arabs, the Turks for 1,000 years. It was one of the greatest weapon systems in the history of warfare because nobody penetrated the secret, nobody found an antidote to it, and it continued working into the age of gunpowder.
Greek fire could be used in a range of weapons systems. The agent could be used as a fuel for flamethrowers, or even in ancient incendiary grenades. Yet the secrets of how to make the substance have been lost for centuries. Poring over forgotten Byzantine manuscripts, leading model maker Richard Windley is deciphering Greek fire's hidden recipe.
There's all sorts of different recipes have been mooted for what this could be, but a lot of them seem as though they're too viscous, too heavy to actually be used with any kind of range. You need an awful lot of pressure and power to project a thick liquid over relatively short space. So we're going with the theory that they would have used some form of naphtha, which is a kind of naturally occurring substance which is similar in flammability to modern petroleum.
As a grenade, it would have been used much as it is today, in explosive devices thrown by a soldier into a mass of enemies.
Throughout the 20th century, really, the grenade has been one of the main shock weapons of infantry troops. But in fact, some of the first grenades were over 1,000 years earlier than this, probably dating back to Byzantine times, if not earlier, when flammable materials were placed inside vessels.
The grenades contained Greek fire, and its main constituent, naphtha. Naphtha is a naturally occurring organic chemical from the same family as petroleum.
The naphtha would have been a burning agent which would have been very sticky and would adhere to clothes and weapons and armour and pretty much anything that it came into contact with, making it difficult to extinguish.
The device became a weapon of terror. The ceramic casing of the grenade could easily smash on impact, causing the lethal contents to explode all over enemy troops, weapons, and equipment.
I think it's fairly easy to imagine people bursting into flames, screams of people being charred and burned, their skin on fire. It would have been a devastating weapon.
For the first time in centuries, Richard is going to test the model.
It's about 2/3 full to give it a little bit of oxygen so that it can flare when it lands.
Thousands of naphtha incendiary grenades would have caused battlefield panic.
If 1,000 of these were suddenly hurled at one time onto the enemy, the effect would be fairly devastating.
But nothing could prepare enemy troops for Greek fire's ultimate death machine. The ancient stories tell of a naval superweapon able to set fire to the air itself. There is evidence of a weapon that delivered Greek fire using flamethrower technology 1,000 years ago. Richard Windley believes he has uncovered the secrets of its design.
The device I've got here is very similar to a two-cylinder force pump which was invented by Heron of Alexandria. The reservoir on this reconstruction is at the back of the piece here, and I'm guessing it probably holds somewhere between 3 and 4 gallons. There's a lid there obviously to make sure that it's protected from sparks and any kind of stray forms of ignition.
Richard has crafted the model with military precision. The piping must withstand pressures of 100 pounds per square inch. The twin pumps will be powered by Richard using the handle, exactly as the ancient pyromarines would have done. This drives the Greek fire into the system.
It's then forced through the pipe, all the way along this delivery pipe here, through a joint at the top which is pivoted so they could actually direct the fire to some extent, and then finally to the jet itself, and this is going to give us the burst of flame.
Richard double-checks every inch. He will be operating a weapon with the same amount of flammable agent as a Vietnam War napalm canister, and it will be on fire.
We've set up a tank of water. We're going to put a wooden target which is going to represent the side of a boat. We're hoping that we'll be able to get a projection of flame from this device somewhere between 20 and 30 feet.
However, this is estimation. No one has operated a Greek fire flamethrower in anger for over 500 years. After hours of safety checks, the deadline has arrived to put the Greek fire machine to the test. This is the most dangerous experiment Richard has ever carried out. For his safety, Richard will be relying on the wisdom of the ancient Byzantine engineers. Exactly the same as in a modern flamethrower, the machine employs a burning taper in front of the nozzle. It is this wick that ignites the flammable agent as it shoots toward the enemy. Now, Richard must put his months of careful planning to the test. Richard's replica of a Greek fire machine is an awe-inspiring success. A raging inferno leaps over 20 feet to engulf the ship's side in fires of over 800 degrees Fahrenheit.
Well, that was absolutely amazing. From where I was standing, that looked totally devastating. It must have looked even more dramatic if it was coming actually straight for you. For something that already would have flammable materials aboard, that thing would be torched by now. I think we can see from this demonstration why everyone in the ancient world was absolutely terrified of this weaponry.
Greek fire is so potent that it continues to burn under the water. Over a millennium after Greek fire was first discovered, the Ancient Discoveries team has proved that the Byzantines did have a device able to control its amazing firepower. But any soldier who has fought on a modern battlefield has respect and fear of devices that can kill remotely. Amazingly, what we might think of as a modern weapon was invented nearly 1,000 years ago in China. No device has caused more devastation and controversy in war than this. It was invented in the ancient world, and its use has remained unchanged for centuries. The landmine. The devices created throughout history to cause death are among the most sophisticated inventions of all time. There is an invention that has terrified soldiers and civilians for centuries. Today, the weapon still has the power to cause controversy because it does not choose its victim. The weapon has maimed and killed indiscriminately for hundreds of years. The weapon is the mine.
Basically, there are two types of landmines. One is used against vehicles and the other one, historically, against personnel. Principally, a mine comprises of a main charge, an initiator which can neither be victim-operated or command-operated, and the fragmentation effect.
Most people today are familiar with images and stories from the Vietnam War's infamous Claymore mine.
It consists of a series of ball bearings in the front and a high explosive charge to the rear. When the high explosive charge is initiated, it'll eject the ball bearings from the front at very high speed and will be lethal to anything stood in front.
The Claymore ripped into thousands of American and Vietnamese soldiers and civilians. To discover its killing potential firsthand, the Ancient Discoveries team is going to test the Claymore. They have set up a mannequin in standard GI body armor and helmet. With the mine in place, the team retreat their vehicles and personnel to a safe distance. They are about to witness what many have not survived to tell. The team can now analyze the damage.
Where the clothes have been stripped away from the mannequin, you can see where the fragments have penetrated and exit marks here at the back. If you come in on the torso, if you look here at the fragmentation jacket, there's the entry marks, and it's penetrated through, gone through the tunic and penetrated the torso.
Medic Paul Clark has isolated the fatal wound.
You can see on the top of the helmet there he's caught a glancing blow, and this ball bearing here hasn't actually penetrated the inside of the helmet. However, he's caught one here in the front of the cheek, which has gone out through into his skull, out the back of his skull there, and has even exited through the steel helmet there. So that one is the one that probably killed him.
But there is evidence of mines thousands of years before the Vietnam conflict.
When people think of landmines, we automatically think probably 20th century, possibly 19th century. But in fact, the Chinese Fire Drake manual, which was written, we think, somewhere around about the 1380s, actually describes quite sophisticated devices.
Richard Windley has created a model of this ancient death machine.
There were cast spheres made of cast iron and sealed with a wooden bung, and they'd be filled with gunpowder and possibly some extra fragmentation, but the idea was that the cast iron is a very brittle material, and this will break, burst, fragment. It'll hurl these burning hot pieces of cast iron through an enormous distance and of cause absolute havoc to anything that gets in its way. Not only that, but these things are going to go up with an enormous explosion.
The Claymore can be activated in two ways: by the action of a passing person, or by a soldier activating the mine. The Chinese mines used exactly the same idea.
Also mentioned in the Fire Drake manual is a remote firing device. It works on the basis of a heavy weight, which we can see here, and a trigger device. So this would be a tripwire, which may simply be a tripwire. It may be connected to a pivoted board, so when somebody stands on the board, it pulls the cord. The Chinese texts aren't all that clear on exactly how these things were used. It does seem as though the intention was to actually dig a hole and bury these things in the ground and then run the tripwire parallel to the ground and probably cover it with debris and sort of leaves and things so it couldn't be seen.
When the tripwire is activated, it releases a catch.
The catch is actually a little paddle on the side of the shaft, and there's simply a lever here which, when it's tripped, just pulls the lever out of the way of the catch.
This causes a weight to fall.
And the cord for the weight is wrapped around the axle. The weight drops very, very quickly, spins the axle very violently, and these two steel wheels, which have got little notches in them, actually engage in the ignition material.
As the wheel turns, material known as pyrite fragments causes a spark. This spark ignites the fuse for the explosive. Richard hands the model over to the explosive expert, Charlie Adcock.
This is the first model of a Chinese landmine that I've come across, so it'll be interesting to see how it performs. We're going to fill it with black powder, which is the proper name for gunpowder. It's a combination of potassium nitrate, sulphur and charcoal, which is believed to be what the filling was at the time. There you go.
The explosives crew set the 700-year-old mine, employing the same methods used by the ancient Chinese sappers.
Arming it. 3, 2, 1.
The ancient mine produces an explosion big enough to cause casualties, even death, 700 years before the Claymore mine was used in modern warfare.
Even the Claymore mines that were used in Vietnam still used a very simple device, a wire, somebody trips over it, pulls it, detonates it, bang, up it goes. So to all intents and purposes, the end result is pretty much the same as 700 years earlier.
We use exactly the same technology that the Chinese use. We've just adapted it with modern techniques and modern materials.
The psychological effect of landmines was as invaluable to ancient commanders as it is today.
If somebody suddenly found themselves in the midst of a minefield, then the demoralizing effect on an enemy would be absolutely vast.
The psychological effect of death machines is often as important as the reality. The elite weapon of the ancient world was the chariot, but this sophisticated device did not classify as a full-blown death machine until the addition of an accessory designed to strike fear into the hearts of enemy troops. A 3-foot hard iron blade, spinning 10 times per second and coming toward you at 24 miles per hour. Two innovations have changed the world, perhaps more than any other in history: the invention of the wheel and the domestication of animals. And there is a piece of war technology from the ancient world that combined both these incredible innovations 4,000 years ago: the chariot.
The chariot was the elite means of transport for the elite troops. Chariots were used, therefore, as battlefield taxis, not just to drop the warrior off, but also to relieve him. There they are in front of their colleagues, winning fame and glory before one and all. But as they tire, before they tire too much, their buddy comes in. He comes in, he jumps off, takes the man on they're going to take, and they make their getaway.
Other civilizations, such as the Egyptians, used the chariot as a mobile arrow-firing platform. Military historian Mike Lowe's is testing how many arrows he can shoot from a chariot in a 30-second loop of an ancient Roman stadium.
This arena is 250 yards long. That means, in a loop, a squadron of looping chariots, if they're about a horse's length behind each other, we'd get 50 chariots in that squadron. And I got off 10 arrows. So that's 500 arrows in 30 seconds, 1,000 arrows a minute. It's a phenomenal barrage. An Apache helicopter gunship carries 1,200 rounds, but it shoots 625 rounds a minute. It's a phenomenal thought that that high-tech bit of modern technology could almost be equaled by this ancient technology.
But the chariot had an inbuilt problem. The engine of a chariot, the horse, is a living animal. No matter how well trained, the beast could become frightened or panic when charging at the enemy. Horses do not simply run into things. Where possible, they attempt to avoid them. To overcome this, ancient engineers developed a deadly accessory. Around 500 BC, Persian military engineers worked out that even though the horses did not run into soldiers, they would run right past them. They invented a device that took advantage of this: the scythed chariot. At the Reconstruction Center at Puy du Fou, France, ancient military experts have created a model of this terrifying war machine. Military historian and world-renowned expert John Naylor has traveled from England to conduct tests on the chariot for ancient discoveries.
This is the Roman gladius, a sword. The sword dominated the battlefield for 2,000 years, 3,000, even 4,000 years. But the ancients had an idea on how to make this even more effective. They decided to add it to tons of horse flesh, steel and wood to create a killing machine. They put scythes onto chariots. The result is 2 of these 3-foot blades propelled towards you by a ton of horse flesh at more than 20 miles an hour. You've got a giant mowing machine, but this mowing machine is designed to chop down people.
The concept was simple yet inspired. If the horse swerved past enemy soldiers, the 3-foot blade attached to the wheel might still cut them down.
We can start here with the scythe. This is the business part of the whole chariot. This is going to chop at a man's legs, but what's imparting the power is the horses, a mass of muscle and bone that is weight as well as power. So all in all, you've got a hammer with sharp bits. Just the sort of thing to tear into a bunch of Macedonians. And we're going to experiment with this one and get an idea of what sort of raw power this weapon's actually got.
To understand the power of this death machine, John's first investigation asks how fast the chariot can go. The stuntman accelerates the machine around the arena.
Obviously, the speed gun is well loved by police officers who like to give us speeding tickets. I don't know if the chariot will get a speeding ticket, but we'll find out. Great, he got up to 20 miles an hour there, so he just tipped the 20. The problem is he's on a turn, so he's having to slow down, but he's really getting some speed out of those horses. Brilliant, there he got 23, an extra 3 miles an hour. He left it a little later on the turn, 23 miles an hour. That's a lot of speed with that amount of weight. I'm fairly sure that when we test it against targets, those targets are going to suffer.
1 ton of machine and horse flying at 23 miles an hour. This would be a terrifying sight for enemy infantry. But were the Persian engineers correct in their assumptions? Could the horse be trained to run past an enemy soldier and slash them down?
Well, I found a brave volunteer who's willing to stand against our stuntman Nell in the chariot. We're going to give the chariot its head. We're going to really let the horses go fast as they can, and then he's going to draw his line up, and that scythe is going to try and take dummy Here's legs from underneath him. This is the ultimate experiment with a scythe chariot. Oh wow, that was just raw power, raw power. It's like being hit by a bus. It didn't just chop through it as we expected, it actually flipped him up in the air. And better still, we use these concrete blocks to stand the dummy in, and it's flipped the concrete blocks. It's actually flipped heavy concrete. That's the amount of force that was imparted through that scythe into our poor unfortunate volunteer. It was just deadly, deadly. Now, the ancient soldiers weren't stupid. They knew what this chariot could do. So just having it running up and down in front of you must have been heart-wrenching for these poor soldiers. And if that charge starts and you're on the front rank, the impulse has got to be to turn and try and save your own skin, because you're the front rank, you're a dead man. Now, if that's going to break up formations, if the front rank are going to turn and run, then your army's in real trouble, because the most effective armies maintain discipline and order. Disrupting a formation is a battle winner. If these chariots work, they've won the battle.
It seemed the scythe chariot was invincible.
So that begs the question, how do you defend against this shock weapon?
It was the greatest military commander of them all, Alexander the Great, who would use the ultimate defense against a chariot attack.
This is the caltrop. We know that Alexander used these at Gaugamela against Darius and against Darius's scythe chariots, and this is the way that ultimately the Romans defeated the chariot. Whichever way it falls, it always lands with a spike up, and that spike is going to go through the foot of a horse and stop this penetrating charge. Well, we've had an amazing day in this fantastic arena, playing around with chariots, with scythes, and seeing what they can do. And it's borne out what the ancients have written down and left for us. We know that they're a weapon which can be a massive force on the battlefield, but we also now know that it can be defeated. It's not the ultimate weapon, but boy, is it a deadly one.
But of all the death machines investigated by the Ancient Discoveries team, there is one that combines all the essential aspects of the others. Armed with hundreds of catapults, manned by thousands of soldiers, the ancient world created the largest movable land weapon in history. It was so large and so well armed that even its name was more impressive than any other death machine. It was called the Helepolis, the conqueror of cities. Anti-personnel weapons, surface-to-air missiles, area denial ordnance. Each military device has a name that reveals use and tactics. And there was no machine in antiquity whose name better revealed its purpose and design than this. The largest death machine in history. It was so big and carried so much firepower, it was simply called the Taker of Cities. June 323 BC saw the death of the most successful general in history, Alexander the Great. In just 8 years, he had expanded his dominion from a few valleys in northern Greece to cover the entire known world. Hundreds of conquered nations covering some 2 million square miles. A feat never accomplished before or since.
So Alexander the Great has died. There's a power vacuum in the known world. This man's created a vast empire, and now, of course, the big question is who is going to inherit it.
On his death, his generals fought for control of this colossal virgin empire.
There are 3 contending powers struggling for dominance in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Macedonians, led by Antigonus and Demetrius, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies in Egypt, and they're fighting for critical strategic positions.
The conflict was to be settled in the Eastern Mediterranean. Here, trade routes brought jewels and spices from the east and grain from the fertile Nile Valley into the urban centers of Greece and Rome. Control of the islands here meant control of the empire, and one particular island was to find itself at the heart of the ancient world's widest-ranging power struggle, the island of Rhodes.
Rhodes is the perfect place to control seaborne trade, and seaborne trade is money, and money is power.
In 304 BC, Demetrius the Besieger, leader of the Macedonians, set out to conquer Rhodes. It would not be easy.
Like all major harbors in the ancient world, Rhodes was part of a fortified city, and the fortifications reflected the importance of the position. They were large, they were tall, and they were pretty thick. You couldn't climb over them, you couldn't get around them, there was no way in, you would have to make a hole in the wall.
Demetrius proposed the construction of the largest, most powerful siege machine in history, the Helepolis.
The breakthrough with the Helepolis is the idea of building an overpoweringly tall and overpoweringly strong mobile platform that can be brought up to the walls of the city and then used to batter down elements of the city wall, to put troops onto the city walls and to overtake the defenses.
This tower was 130 feet high and 65 feet wide. So the weight of this was tremendous. It must have weighed over 150 tons.
But despite its enormous size, this colossus was surprisingly maneuverable.
It rolled on 8 wheels. The diameter of each one of them was 15 feet. Altogether, Demetrius had to occupy 3,400 people just to move this thing.
On board was an arsenal any ancient general would have been proud of. The firepower of the Helepolis was greater than any other siege engine in history, and it was covered in the most advanced defense system yet invented.
3 sides of this tower were covered with iron plates to make it fireproof.
Richard Windley is investigating the fireproof qualities of the Helepolis armor.
We've got descriptions from early Roman writers like Vitruvius of the sort of approximate construction of these. What I've done here is to try and simulate the top bit of the tower, which would be the lightest in construction. But it's pretty substantial. We think that from Vitruvius that the proportions of these posts would be about 6 inches square at the top of the tower. It's pretty heavily constructed, and as one went further down the tower, it would be stronger and stronger and stronger. The base posts were between 15 and 18 inches square, which is pretty massive timbers. But of course, As soon as you're using timber, and particularly in a sort of hot, dry climate, they're very, very vulnerable to fire. So what Demetrius did was he clad the entire thing in metal sheets.
Richard is going to test their effectiveness against his Greek fire grenades.
We've made a slightly different version of Greek fire. This is a kind of naphtha substitute with pitch and various other things, so it's very, very black and sticky. The idea is we're going to chuck this at the armour, see whether it actually bursts into flame, and see whether the armour withstands it or whether there's any effect on the armour at all. Well, the armour seems to be doing its job. There's no sign of anything happening on the other side of the metal plates.
This mega death machine seemed unstoppable, the tank of the ancient world.
When the ancients started designing these complicated siege machines, they were facing exactly the same problem that the armies had on the Western Front in 1914. The defense was stronger than the offense, mobility had disappeared, the enemy was just over there, but you couldn't get near them. They had machine guns, they had barbed wire, they had artillery, and every time your guys got out of the trenches, they got cut down. You had to find a way of knocking a hole in their defenses, of getting your guys through so they could come to grips with the enemy's infantry and command the battlefield again. So you needed a machine that could solve that problem.
The innovators of World War I invented a device that changed warfare.
The solution comes in Britain, and they work out that the newly developed American Caterpillar tractor, fitted with some armor plate and some lightweight naval guns, will give you a kind of land battleship. And the 1916 equivalent of the Helepolis is right behind us. It's a Mark I type tank, designed for one job and one job only. This is a short-range, mission-specific assault weapon with a single function, the destruction of fixed enemy defenses. So we can make some very clear comparisons with the Helepolis. It's a machine for a particular function. It goes forward, it attacks fixed defenses, it overcomes the best the enemy can put up, and gives your guys, the infantry, the chance to get to grips with the enemy.
But like the tank of World War I, the Helepolis had its flaws.
It doesn't go backwards very well. It's easily put off. If you dig a wide enough ditch, it'll fall in. And because it takes a long while to build a 5-story wooden tower with huge wheels covered in iron plates, nobody's particularly surprised when it starts coming towards the wall.
The Helepolis was too big and too unwieldy to be effective. Because it could not move quickly, it could not be redeployed where needed, or retreated if it came under attack.
The Helepolis was a great idea, but of course it wasn't going to work. It was too big, it was too cumbersome. There are very funny accounts of the Rhodians nipping out and stripping bits of metal off its flanks and then setting fire to the wood inside. So it was an enormous white elephant.
Demetrius abandoned both his machine and the siege, leaving Rhodes unconquered, and the Rhodians with the equivalent of millions of dollars worth of iron and timber.
I believe that it would have been more effective if the Rhodians would just see these things suddenly, just to see it appear in front of their eyes. But Demetrius built it right there and then in front of the walls of the city. Maybe they were just a little bit too familiar with it. Maybe their fear or the feeling that Demetrius wanted to create to them was just not there anymore.
From machines as big as a building to devices you can fit in your pocket, the ancient death machines were as varied as the men who invented them. Some were responsible for killing thousands. Others worked by surrounding themselves with an atmosphere of terror, as potent as the reality of death. Many were examples of generals and inventors overstretching their ambitions and were abandoned. And yet others have remained unchanged in warfare, even till today. But the investigations by the Ancient Discoveries team have proved one thing. Even without the aid of modern materials and electronics, the ancients created an arsenal of death machines. Machines capable of producing fear, causing thousands of casualties, and intensifying the horror of war.